Good afternoon, and well, hopefully you have some more people come. My name is Kim Tan. I work in Marco's marketing and sales operations. I'll be your host. So if you have any questions that you want to get answered, or if you're having any issues with anything, feel free to chat me. We are recording this session, and we are going to set up a follow-up email. So if you want to share this with your colleagues, want to review anything that's shown today, you will get access to that. We'll send that by the end of the week. And then I want to introduce Jay Brown. So Jay works at Marco, and he's going to be your moderator and host as well.
Thank you so much, Kim. Pleasure to be with you all here today. As mentioned, my name is Jay Brown. I'm the leader and founder of the Marco Print Security Practice. Speaking of being moderator, we will not be forcibly muting mics today, and there is no time limit for answers, but there is a lot to get through, so we will jump right into it. If you didn't know, this is part one of two in a webinar series we'll be doing on all things print environment and security. In today's part one call, we're going to be starting foundationally. We're going to be looking at the threat landscape, evaluating the role of hardware in a comprehensive security strategy, and keeping with the hardware theme, you're going to leave today with an action-oriented list of things that you can do, best practices and strategies that you can implement. In part two, which we'll be announcing shortly and sending out to your emails, so be sure to keep an eye out for it, we're going to be looking at drivers, document servers, cloud printing, driver list printing like IPP, and for those that are really in the know, may have seen that Microsoft's Windows Protected Print Mode is going to be coming out potentially here next month, or this month now, for secure printing that's going to be dreaded, or anticipated, a highly something release. We're going to find out together in that call, so you won't want to miss it. But anyway, I'm joined by three exceptional individuals from HP, and I want to take a moment to introduce each of them to you. So, up first, Mike Armstrong. Pleasure to have you today. Mike is a 15-year veteran with Hewlett-Packard, the manufacturing backbone of what makes up our technical support here at Marco. Smart, charismatic, handsome are all adjectives people use to describe me every day, but I'll have to share the limelight with Mike, as Mr. Armstrong has it all. Mike, welcome to the call.
Thanks, Jay. Way too kind. Appreciate having us on today. Looking forward to the meeting.
Next up, we have Laura Brady. Laura, who is similarly to Mike in a pre-sales focused technical consulting role at HP. Laura comes to us with a very experienced and tenured career with over 20 years at Xerox, and now on the second half of her career here at HP. Xerox was certainly known as an industry leader in the print world for a very long time, and I think Laura could now convince you that HP has been wearing that crown. Laura, Queen of Technical Consulting, you honor us. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much, Jay. Echoing Mike, you are too kind. Appreciate the introduction. Appreciate the opportunity to be in front of your customers to talk about this really important topic. Thank you.
The pleasure is ours. And without further anticipation, our keynote speaker, Steve Inch. Steve is the cybersecurity strategy and product manager for HP's print division, a co-founder at the technology startup Effigy, and honestly, you should just check out his LinkedIn and connect with Steve because he has quite a storied career driving the strategy behind many products and services you use every day. Steve, great to have you here.
Thank you so much, Jay, and everybody. It's great to be here with you and share kind of the latest, dynamics at play in the Wild West of cybersecurity, especially as it relates to print security. It's boy, is it a dynamic space right now. So, and always.
Well, Steve, I got to ask, correct me if I'm wrong, but after an over 11-year career at HP, you took a 2-year change of pace with Engaged Technology Group, and then somehow the leaders at HP were able to convince you to boomerang back to lead this important topic. What convinced you?
Well, really the opportunity to focus and lead the security strategy and all of the new developments we're doing around AI and security at HP. It's just the culture of the company is incredible. My little 2-year stint was a startup, and it was great. It was in the mobile space, so I was able to get a lot of knowledge and experience of what to do and what not to do in the mobile space. So this was a great opportunity to come back and really fuel what I started back 15, 16 years ago with the the kind of onset of print security in the industry. So with HP and all of the work we did around the Wolf campaign with Christian Slater and the like. So thrilled to be back at HP. It's been now about a year and a half, and just looking at just an exciting future.
Yeah, well, I know that you have up first for us about a 15-minute presentation that's going to hit the first two bullet points of our agenda today. Then we're going to be opening it up to more of a discussion style with Laura, Mike, and Steve weighing in on a couple of different topics, and then closing up with some great action items, resources to share with the audience. But I'd like to turn it over to you now, Steve. Take it away.
All right, great. Well, this is, I said the Wild West. Well, this is a live shot from Fortinet. This is the threat landscape that, as we are speaking and discussing today, what you're seeing are threats in a lot of different areas, from from malware to ransomware. And it's just the reality today is it is constant. And I always like to say, when you wake up in the morning, you step out of bed, you are actually stepping into the octagon. And you could be a 10th degree black belt, and it doesn't matter how good you are, you're going to get hit. And this kind of illustrates a lot of the reality of what we're all facing. And just the weaponization that we're seeing of AI with the use of malware, with the use of AI. Just a lot of interesting things happening. And, it's all about how to keep yourself secure. How can you protect, detect, and then most importantly, recover from the inevitable breach and or malware attack that you're going to have to contend with. And so that's just the reality we face today. So in looking at trends, these are, I'll share with you that at HP, we have our HP Security Lab out of Bristol, UK. And this team is on the cutting edge when it comes to the development and design of new cryptographic algorithms, new standards we're establishing to deal with some of these upcoming threats. And what we're seeing, interestingly, if you look at on the left side, emerging technologies and what that means from an emerging threats perspective, you really want to work with a company like Marco and in partnership with HP to ensure that you're getting a view of threats and remediations and protections across the entire journey as it relates to endpoint devices, not just PCs, but printers as well. And it's really, really important. So at HP and the work we do with Marco, we have a full view of the supply chain from the very beginning, where we're sourcing components that go in the factory that go into their print devices. We want to make sure that they're not malware injected when we get them. And so we look from that very genesis of the device and the components that make up the device all the way through to where the vulnerabilities exist in use in your environments, all the way to when you want to recycle or get rid of a particular device. So there are threats that really span that entire spectrum, that journey, if you will, of a printer's life in your environment. And so we are really looking at that from a supply chain, and really this shift left from in-use device in your office setting or in a hybrid environment or at home with your hybrid workers. You've got to pay attention to how can we protect, detect, and recover in that arena. But in terms of key threats that are coming down, there is a bullet train that is coming right at us that I'm going to share with you. If you're not familiar, you've heard a lot likely about quantum computing, and we're going to touch on that here next. But some of the other things I've mentioned, weaponization of AI, and this is really an important thing that we're seeing, and I'll share some actual statistics that are very current. And it's really interesting to see how not only AI technologies are impacting what's happening. I want to level set on the reality that, and the fact that AI has been around since 1950. It's not like AI is a new thing. What's new is the ability of your 5-year-old to get online and type words and have a beautiful image come in literally seconds. That's just the wonder of technology. And that has fueled, of course, the generative AI, which is one technique, one capability using large language models, but big databases, right? Which is the internet is a database. But there are a lot of other techniques that both for use of AI for offense as well as defense. And so we'll touch on that in a minute. But let's talk about this one bullet train I was speaking of. And the reality today is quantum computing power is as it was in the past with PCs, where with computers, personal computing was in the mainframe stage until it became, and only a few people could afford a mainframe or companies. And then you have, today, the laptop, right? That is kind of where we are. We're in the mainframe stage for quantum computing. It inevitably will become at scale. The power of a quantum computer will be in your laptop. And the reality is when that occurs, that then means that power is scaled for anybody to use. That is when we have concerns prior to that, and I'll explain that in a second. But the reality is when we have quantum computing power at scale, it will relegate current encryption standards totally useless. So the current RSA, let's say 256-bit advanced encryption standard is going to be relegated obsolete. The hackers will have the ability to immediately get in and access data, access software, access credentials, identity, and frankly, all heck is going to break loose. The interesting thing is this reality is forecasted to occur around the 2030, 5 years from now. The reason there's a stake in the ground is we're using what the U.S. government has established with the Department of Defense, NSA, and NIST establishing by the year 2030, they will no longer accept or purchase firmware or software that is not post-quantum resistant, meaning you need to have what is referred to as PQC or post-quantum cryptography that is now being developed and will be embedded in devices moving forward. And you want to make sure you're working with someone like Marco and a vendor such as HP that is working on this technology. As you may or may not know, HP announced back in March of this year the first quantum resistant PCs. And we have very soon, we have designs on quantum resistance in the print space as well. So it's important because you need to know as you're looking to the future 5 years out, when this threat is inevitable, you want to make sure you're looking that far in advance to ensure you're discussing this with Marco to ensure that you're ready to be able to flip that switch. Keep in mind, this threat is not a Y2K type threat. It is not like, oh boy, at one specific date, we're going to flip that switch and all hell's going to break loose. That is not the reality. It will evolve over time. What I can share with you is when you look at this timeline, you'll see the stake in the ground in 2030, the mandate from the US government around post-quantum resistance. The reality is the state threat actors like North Korea, China, Russia, others, they have plenty of wherewithal to get access to a larger mainframe / quantum computer. So their targets, other governments, Infrastructure like utilities, things such as healthcare and public sector are really going to be some of the targets there. So you want to really be thinking about this now, because that could occur before this, general 2029 to 2031 timeframe that is being viewed with somewhat of a crystal ball, but no one's going to be exactly sure. So you just want to be prepared. So that's the quantum piece. The other piece at Marco and HP, we look at AI for security. Sometimes we say AI versus security. Well, the reality is that's not it. It's not AI versus security. It's a complementary reality that you want to have in your environment, where you are leveraging existing cybersecurity human beings in their roles and the tool sets they're using, like endpoint detection and response, network detection and response, and SIM tools, which are security incident and event management tools. It's the combination of those tools in leveraging the strengths of AI and getting, not leveraging the weaknesses of AI. So it's this complementary piece. Speaking to that in specific, we look at 4 pillars. We look at AI for offensive attack. We put our hacker hats on and we say, okay, what are we going to leverage in terms of AI? I first look at what data I have, and AI is only as good as the data set you're leveraging to have the model learn from and learn on. And what can we do to turbocharge malware and phishing attacks? This is why you're seeing such a ramp up immediately of ransomware, is because attackers are using generative AI to make phishing attacks very realistic. And that's one of the beauties of generative AI. They can do that. So you're going to see more of that occurring. You're also going to hear about voice attacks, where your voice is being sent to your grandparents and they're getting a voice message that is, you saying, hey, I'm in trouble, please send money. Well, that's happening already. So this is one of the things that is critical, is the AI for attack. Then from a defensive perspective, how can we leverage AI to boost detection speed and efficacy of the tools that we're using to defend? This is where you get into security co-pilots to help with the application of defensive measures against these kinds of attacks. Then we want to look at security for AI, meaning the models, data models, and the training that we're doing in the AI that we're developing, both software vendors as well as hardware manufacturers. We want to make sure that there is security of how we deploy those models. There's security around the data and the training methodologies. And then the final piece is security of AI, meaning we got to make sure we're following best practices of security lifecycle development, making sure our algorithms are hardened, and et cetera. So, and then fundamentally, what we have is that we always, as a company at HP, it's really founded on ethics and fairness, that, AI trust is absolutely foundational to everything we do. So just to give you real world stats that are very current around generative AI and attacks, you'll see that 56% of executives from SMB to enterprise globally believe attackers will have advantage over defenders within 2 years. We've seen a 76% increase in attacks since the launch of ChatGPT, and mainly this is ransomware. And the first entry point tends to be phishing attacks to get credentials. Then the attacker moves laterally in the environment into the network through an entry point like a printer or a PC or a webcam or whatever, security camera, what have you. And then they get into the keys to the kingdom, and that's where they'll lock down data and then attack with ransomware and release that ransomware. Just some really interesting data from the Identity Theft Resource Center. This data breach victims, we're seeing an increase in job scams of 118%, where the Google Voice remains the top scam. We're seeing increase over quarter over quarter in Q2 of this year versus 23. That data actual victims that have self-reported around 1,170% increase. Phishing attacks have increased 1,265% in the last month. So, this is a reality. The other thing that has occurred is this is a quick snapshot of the vendors in the cybersecurity space. It's broken up into different categories of security, from network security to application security to endpoint. The endpoint security alone, what's interesting is, and not just endpoint, but you look at EDR systems or XDR or MDR systems like CrowdStrike. Well, July 19th occurred, and we all, most of us, experienced the blue screen of death. The reality there, I call this the power slap heard around the world. Well, this really woke up, not that CISOs were asleep by any stretch. Chief security officers are inundated with alerts. To give you an example, at HP internally, our CISO and his team, Zulfi, they receive on average 500 million security alerts just from our internal system a month. So it's not hard to see that they have a lot of things on their plate, and printers are not something, and even the EDR tools that they're using. This occurred with CrowdStrike. It was not a cyber attack, but it was that single point of failure reality that brought to light the current environment that boards of directors, CISOs, CTOs, and CIOs are all thinking about now, which is this concept of consolidation risk. What does that mean? Consolidation risk is that single point of failure, basically. That as you go back to this landscape, and as you see, there's been a consolidation of acquisition and VCs interested in a quicker harvest of their investments in startups in the cyberspace. You're seeing such things like mergers and acquisitions happening right and left. And a case in point is Cisco acquiring Splunk, a SIM tool vendor. So this is happening, and more people are looking at providing a unified, multi-tooled platform. Hence, this reality that occurred that gets now folks thinking, wait a minute, okay, how do we balance this? Well, I think a really interesting opportunity for us from an endpoint perspective is to build more threat intelligence at the endpoint in the devices, which we can do with things like AI, we can do with simple code without having to impact performance in a negative way. So you're going to see, I think, a trend more around that. So in summary, cyber threats continue to evolve, more frequent, more sophisticated, more diverse. Why care about printers and PCs? I mean, why care about printers in particular? Well, it's interesting. Up to 90% of cyber attacks and 70% of data breaches successfully occur and originate at the endpoint. That's to open the first door that they go through. If you're in the octagon, your first point of defense is going to be your appendage, your hand and your feet. Those are the first points, first line of defense. And that's why you're seeing a lot of this originating from endpoints. The current cost of a data breach, I don't probably have to share this with any of you, but the reality you're facing is on average, it's about a $4 million financial hit to your organization. Not to mention the reputational decrease you're liable to have to contend with. Endpoints are entry points, and that's not the hacker's destination. Dwell time where they enter a printer and they enter and inject an exploit, a vulnerability, they could live there under the radar for 199 days in the device, unless the device has the inherent capability to deal with that. So this is really interesting because it is an entry point. They have dwell time but their access is to remain under the radar of cyber tools and get access to credentials and things through these kinds of phishing attacks. And then they go, broader into the network. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but just at a high level, I think it's interesting to note cyber crime if it were a country, it will be the second largest gross domestic product at $20 trillion in 2026, just behind the United States in GDP. That is the reality we're facing. So quickly, firewalls are insufficient, 28% increase in average monthly insider data exposure and loss. And, the reality is, again, you're going to get hit. 73% of CISOs expect a major security breach next year. So what can you do about this? Well, what's interesting, if we take a look at your environment, it's important that you think about your environment from a zero trust framework, which means you don't give anyone access unless they are approved to have access. It's all about, it's all about never trust, always verify. So your environment can be in office and work from home. What are the realities? Well, a threat could be a malicious code injection in a device. You want to have your remediation. With the HP Enterprise devices, you have your Sure Start BIOS protection, which has automatic detection of malware in the BIOS boot up sequence, and then self-healing that automatically occurs without the need for IT intervention. You also have Memory Shield. So if it's past the boot up, this is when your device is really vulnerable 95% of the life of the printer. Is what is protecting the memory? Well, we have, with Memory Shield, you have not only protection for malware in memory, but also for zero-day attacks in memory through control flow integrity capability. You want to make sure your users are using multi-factor authentication when they walk up and interact with the printer. It's absolutely critical that they don't have immediate access to that device. They are given access to those solutions through multi-factor with your cloud identity provider, and then they can have access to the appropriate solutions for them to do their tasks securely. We talk about, out of the factory, disable all USB host ports. So it's a big vulnerability and a point of exploit if a USB drive that has malware infected goes into your device. The other thing that's internal to HP Enterprise devices is this continuous monitoring we do with Memory Shield and Connection Inspector. Connection Inspector looks for data packets leaving the printer, going to a remote server, and if that behavior is not what the printer should be doing, or in other words, anomalous behavior, the printer knows that's not what it should be doing, and it shuts down automatically, reboots, self-heals, and then keeps that event in syslogs for later threat analysis. And it's really critical that is continuously being monitored, is that outbound communication from the printer, because it could be an example of a hacker trying to get command and control of your individual device to get into your network. Then you have to secure data. The data is absolutely vital to have encrypted and secure as it goes from the client laptop to the device, to the printer destination. So that's a critical thing to need. You want to make sure you have cartridge security on your toner cartridges, because there are threats that occur with malicious cartridges. And then you have to look at all of this fleet that you have out there And what can I do to easily manage the compliance and the security settings and posture or policy of that device and those devices across our entire network? And you can do that with a solution like Security Manager that Marco can share with you. And then Marco provides a great firmware vulnerability assessment that is absolutely critical too, to in literally 3 seconds, you can see the level of vulnerability of all of your fleet of devices. So we look at an end-to-end spectrum. I just focused in on this center one, which is your environment, but there are threats that can happen on either end, of course. So you need to make sure you're looking at this whole thing, and Marco can help you do this. I've talked about these elements. This gives you more detail on the core unique differentiators that are key to the HP fleet, enterprise fleet. We have Sure Start, we have Memory Shield and Connection Inspector, and those are all embedded, and there's continuous monitoring with automatic self-healing and recovery. And then we have the Security Manager software that allows you to manage all of this fleet and ensure your security posture across the devices. This is the most important takeaway, I think, besides the need for an assessment and ensure that you've assessed your risk and what you're comfortable living with after you look at the assessment, what you need to fix right away, and then what level of risk are you going to live with ongoing. What's really critical here is to realize that the device, when you plug it in, and its life in your environment is only in the BIOS boot up sequence 5% of its life over a 10-year span. 95+% of its life in the environment over 10 years is in what we call runtime, which includes sleep mode and in use by your end users. That is 95+%. What embedded capabilities exist in the printers you're purchasing and or have in your environment that actually not only secure the BIOS boot up here, but what is continuously monitoring during runtime in sleep mode and in use? And candidly, this is absolutely critical here, so you understand that and you've got to ask your vendors, can you protect with automatic capabilities the hardware-based runtime intrusion that you need in memory, the control flow integrity you need in memory to look for zero-day attacks, and what are you doing to check the outbound communications of the device? Absolutely critical. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you so much. You've given us a lot to think about, and I've been taking some notes. If I could, we started, it sounds like you were talking about logical qubits reaching criticalities for running actually useful computations, breaking modern encryption, and that was estimated as something that's probably going to be on the books in just 5 years, potentially, which
Potentially, yes.
I think really hits home that when you're even thinking about Print Nightmare, which was last year's in 2021, that seems like a not too long ago situation, and yet we were running and are today, and that's part of why it went so poorly, drivers from 2012. We're running firmware on devices. If you haven't updated them and it's still chugging along, that HP 4200, 4100, they are built like a brick. They will last a nuclear apocalypse. But their end of support, they're running potentially firmware from 2012, 2008, 2016, depending on when it went end of life, right?
Right.
So I get the question a lot from people, like they say, "Hey Marco, you're clearly manufacturer agnostic," which we are. We have Konica Minolta, Canon, Kyocera, Lexmark,
Absolutely.
Fujifilm, Zebra, HP, and more. Just talking about print devices and manufacturers that we support. But why HP always comes back into the conversation, and why you guys are really, in my opinion, my personal and professional opinion, the leader of the topic is the year 2010. And there's two things that happened in that year. One, CBS Investigates. Almost everyone that paid attention to the news at any time in that year heard about this. It was huge news because it was a warehouse in New Jersey with old copier equipment, hard drives that were unencrypted, and a ton of sensitive data, most notably from healthcare, but there were a lot of others that got swept under the rug, like criminal justice and others. Anyway, that turned into what was at the time the largest HIPAA violation to date, really ramping up government action and enforcement of that regulation. But on the other side was a grad student named Kui, who then later headed up Red Balloon Security. He was a grad student that wanted to make an HP printers, and something everybody has and had then as well, catch on fire. He wasn't successful. Allegedly, he only got smoke, as the story goes, at least in my research. But he was able to prove a lot of things weren't great when it came to the inherent security of the devices. So that is at direct odds of what Steve is talking about today, what the departments that he and his peers lead at HP, where it's embedded, baked in, it's very much a focus. But it did kick off the conversation into high gear. Those two events in 2012 was, in my opinion, the start of true print security, at least as a topic, a profession,
Absolutely. Yeah.
all of those things, right? So HP has and continues to be the Windows versus Macintosh of the print world. There are just physically more HP devices than anyone else. They're targeted much more often, and they have to have a response. Their reputation is truly on the line there. So, Steve, thank you first and foremost for that overview.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. And I wanted to turn it over to Laura to take a huge step back and just answer one generic question, which is, you are a technology consultant at HP, primarily focused on pre-sale. So we rely upon you in the channel. That's what it's called when you're a Marco of the world. You resell HP products. We're the channel. How do we interact with you? What does Marco utilize your services for? What types of problems do you get brought into? Just answering some of those general questions. What do you do?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Jay. Marco is one of our top partners here in the US for sure. So Mike and I, because you're such a large organization, we split responsibility for really answering those pre-sale type questions. We get brought in to do security discussions with a customer. We get brought in to help source what solutions might work best. We get brought in really when somebody is having has an issue, and we can help alleviate it and elevate it inside of HP to the right subject matter experts. So Mike and I wear a lot of hats, but we're here to really support you as one of our power services partners in the US to really help you sell. We're available to be on calls with your reps. We're available to talk directly to customers if need be, help you with RFP responses, especially as people are starting to write more RFPs that are focused on security and not just speeds and feeds and some of the things that traditionally copier RFPs have been a part of. So we are really here as your resource, really as your bridge to the manufacturer HP. Participate in things like this and get access to Steve Inch and access to other subject matter experts inside of HP. So really here to support you in all ways.
Yeah. Well, if you might not know this, Laura, but I actually got my job at Marco specifically because of HP 6 years ago.
That's great.
And what happened was the Steves of the world, and in fact, probably Steve himself, let's be honest, who were leading the conversation when it comes to how are we going to augment our delivery? How are we going to get more information in people's hands that's useful, it's actionable, it's meaningful, it's something of substance. One of those features, which Laura, I'm going to have you speak on in just a moment, was the original HP firmware security assessment. And maybe we'll talk about its origins, but that era was going on about 6-7 years ago, and Marco, being a major mega dealer, honestly, in the print industry, was saying, hey, if HP is doing this thing, we should probably have an answer for that. So that's when they found me up on the streets, they swaddled me, and they didn't let me leave the basement. So print security, excellent career. I love it here. When we're talking about the firmware assessment, though, can you talk about its original form and what it is now? And I'll augment that a little bit on how we've been utilizing that with over 1,000 assessments performed in the last 6 years. So, Laura, please talk about what's on the screen.
Absolutely. So this is actually the output that Marco, as one of our partners, gets access to. that you can actually take and export from a data collection agent. So that's the agent that actually is counting, your black and white prints and your meters. We can do an export from there with just 3 fields: model, serial number, and firmware version. And we've got a huge database. Every printer really HP's ever made is actually in this database. And as Steve mentioned, really within 3 minutes, you run this CSV file through our tool and you get something that is appearing on the screen here. And what it's basically showing you, it's like a stoplight. It's red, yellow, green. There's blue in there as well, but blue is really not the area we're going to focus on. We're going to really focus on that red area that's basically got known vulnerabilities. And we're basically showing on this particular example, 41% of the fleet is actually vulnerable right now. And you can see a little chart on the side that actually shows you the criticality of the vulnerabilities that we're showing. So this tool over time, as Jay says, has evolved. We've added more to it. But what this is really actionable. You can take, if you look at some of the devices in here, can go from red to green just with a firmware upgrade. So just by taking the firmware that's on hp.com in partnership with Marco, you guys could put that on there and get those red devices to green. But there's also this yellow area, or this area where we're no longer publishing firmware fixes for these devices. And it's usually typically those old devices, those old bricks that don't stop printing. However, they've got firmware so old, we're no longer supporting them. And there's also some no longer supported in that red area as well. And those are really the areas that should be focused on first, aside from updating the firmware, really looking at these old devices and bringing them current, bringing them into our enterprise devices that have those embedded security features that Steve talked about, those hardware features that really make our devices unique and protect from any kind of anomalies or any kind of vulnerabilities. So Marco, and specifically Jay, does a great job in helping and assisting and kind of telling this story to you. Basically, here's your fleet, this is what it looks like today, and here's what steps we should take to try and get you so you're not so vulnerable, so you don't have these low-hanging issues here that you can kind of shore up with either a firmware upgrade or a printer replacement.
Yeah, and there's a really talented guy. I haven't met him, but his name is Alex Thatcher. He is the mastermind of developing, maintaining, and otherwise updating this tool. Has been a great pen pal over the years for me as things we've requested features and whatnot. But thank you, Laura.
Absolutely.
This tool is fantastic, and it is stand out in the fact that it is unfortunately the only one of its kind that we have access to, and that is specific to firmware-based vulnerabilities and analyzing by uploading the current firmware version from, as mentioned, the data collection agent, which is a very lightweight tool. It is not a remote VPN or always on RMM tool. What it does is your meter reads for billing and toner levels for automated toner, two staples of our industry that make a phenomenal customer experience. Like, they are part of what we need to deliver fantastic service. But we do get telemetric data like model number, serial number, firmware version, and we can do some analysis. So one thing that Marco does on top of that assessment is we are looking for end of support on all makes and models of other manufacturers as well. So even if we don't have a direct indexable and searchable list archive of firmware version and which vulnerabilities it has, kind of like their knowledge base articles in Microsoft's world, we still are able to at least say, number one, is it end of support, are firmware patches available? And then number two, are you doing it? Which is, I think, if we all take a moment and think about our own organizations, you can have an amazing device. You upgrade it once every 5, 8, and then longer in some cases, years. But 5 to 8 is a good realm for copiers, and 8 in the printer space when they reach end of support. Are you taking advantage of those firmware updates, though? And in HP's case, again, their Windows versus Microsoft or Macintosh, it's critical. I can't understate that enough. You have to take advantage of these things. You have to be updating their fleet. So one other tool that you guys have, and it's up on the screen, Laura, really tackles not so much the firmware side, but the configurations of the final piece. So if we have end of support, number one. Number two, firmware. Take advantage of those firmware capabilities while they're available and make sure your devices are upgraded when they can't. configurations. This is the settings on the devices. In just a moment, we did get a question on decommissioning, so we'll talk about that procedure. But let's talk for a moment about settings and configurations on HP devices. What's kind of your gold standard solution there?
So the solution we have is called Security Manager. And if you have a fleet of HP devices, what it will allow you to do is set a print policy that will actually allow you to set passwords, all the different passwords that you can set on your devices, any ports and protocols that aren't needed or in use, you can set those in the tool. And what it will do is allow you to set this print policy and push it out to your fleet of devices. So anybody that's in that has a chief information security officer or is in a compliance industry that needs to prove that their network and their endpoint devices are compliant, Security Manager will help not only being able to set this policy, but then be able to remediate if anything gets changed. So if anything in that policy, somebody goes in and changes a password or opens up AirPrint if AirPrint had been closed or anything had been changed, Security Manager will immediately make note and report that a change was made and basically set that printer back to what the policy should be. So it does a really nice job of kind of setting it, forgetting it, and then having reporting to build upon that your fleet is remaining in a standard that you need it to be. The other thing it does a really nice job is that people are starting to really look at having certificates on their printers to allow that extra level of authentication and security. It does a really nice job of being able to manage certificates on your printers, knowing when they're released, when they're expired, when they need to be renewed. It does a really nice job of keeping track of that. So folks looking for that really second level of security on their print that want to add certificates to their fleet, HP Security Manager does a really nice job of automating that process. So really for fleet compliance and keeping everything together, it does a really nice job for anyone who's got a larger HP fleet out there.
The other thing that's really cool is if you've got your global policy established, you buy a new device, you put it and connect it to the network, it immediately has an instant on capability to assign that policy to the device.
Mm-hmm. Well, and another obvious reason why this is so relevant is while HP is, again, in this particular case and objectively, this tool is currently one of a kind. It's the best of its breed, and other manufacturers are catching up. They're getting closer to feature parity. But it's so important because in the print world, an A3 device, the paper size, 8.5 by 11, a printer, you're going to have far more of those physically in an environment on average than you would a copier that costs much more or much larger, and manual hardening isn't an impossible task. So when we're thinking about why these tools probably started with HP, it's just the size, the market, the situation that they were in. They had customers demanding these items. They needed a way to do things like certificate issuance, right? So for 802.1x, for port authentication, how can I automate that? It wasn't part of WebJet Admin, the power user tool that does have an equivalent with every manufacturer essentially. Well, I want to ask a question to Steve and then throw it over to Mike to talk about secure by default, encryption of devices, and then, of course, the natural question that leads to of secure decommissioning that I'll be able to augment with the Marco approach. But Steve, in my research, as I'm looking into HP's secure by default practices, I know that 2017 was a big year, 2019, and then feature updates continued with those various encryptions. Were you in the room when that happened? Were you leading that? Like, what was going on? I want to know the history, everything behind that, because it was such an obvious move now, but it wasn't at the time. I'm sure you could argue at the time.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. We are constantly looking. I mean, one of the benefits and one of the other reasons I returned to HP is, you know, we aren't just a printer manufacturer. And what's interesting is because we have our personal system side and we have this incredible team in Bristol, UK, that is really doing, I mean, mind-blowing things when it comes to, you know, threat intelligence, cryptographic technologies. That's what they're doing. They're spending their time really leading there. And that's how we can influence, at least help to influence with other partners, the standards for security. So at that time, we were really looking at what can we do. And it was interesting, you mentioned Red Balloon with runtime intrusion detection. We actually partnered with them back at that time to incorporate runtime intrusion detection, but it was at an app layer. And what's interesting, we're seeing continually, as much as we put defenses up against the threat actors, they're going to go, okay, fine, we'll go deeper. And then we bring up another defense, and then they go deeper. And so they're getting down to the kernel level now. And so, you've got to have this full stack. And that's really what we were after at that time, was thinking through, okay, we know this is their mentality because they're lazy inherently. They just want the easiest harvest for they don't want to do extra work if they don't have to. I mean, literally when I came back, so last July, not this past, but the prior in 2023, I went on the dark web and I was able, or I didn't because I'd get fired, but I was able to acquire a ransomware as a service attack from the dark web for anywhere. If I wanted to spend $100 or I wanted to spend $1,000, doesn't matter. I didn't even need to know how to code. I could just point it at an IP address. I mean, it's that nuts out there. And so I just, this is just one of those things where they're making these malware tools very available, very turnkey. And it's absolutely critical that we are always leading in terms of, look, we're trying to make, and I'm participating with Xerox and Konica Minolta and others in the MPS Association to help to raise, the level across print. It's not just, only HP. It's like, we want to see our customers more secure. And so I applaud our competitors that are bringing up their capabilities. I mean, it's absolutely critical because we want our customers secure at the end of the day. So that was kind of what was in our thinking in terms of, we were seeing the landscape. We had the insights from our Bristol team, and we're able to get full global intelligence on threats. And so that's kind of, how it all played out.
Yeah, it's a very interesting history. Love it, hate it. I find it fascinating. So thank you for sharing that with us. Mike Armstrong, in 2 minutes, because then we'll go to a rapid fire series of questions we've had come in. I want to know your thoughts on what type of memory exists in devices. Are they encrypted? What do I need to be worried about? Is my print jobs data stored there? Just that thought process, especially in regards to end of support / decommissioning a device.
Yeah, I think you talked about it earlier with that CBS news article. I was around when that happened, and got a lot of emails and phone calls and discussions around that point. I mean, and you talked about what we do with secure by default as well. I mean, what we do with our devices is we want to help our customers be more secure, even if they don't do anything. So our devices are protecting themselves. They're trying to protect themselves and heal themselves before customers even touch them and configure them. The same happens on our hard drives. So any of the enterprise managed devices that you purchase today are going to come standard with an encrypted hard drive. And we've been doing this for quite some time, even before, the rest of the industry started seeing them. And so, we support all the overwrite capabilities to support government requirements, those types of things as well. And we provide that to everyone through firmware. The other nice thing that we do on our devices with our future smart firmware is we add new capabilities and encryptions and all of those things. So as you're updating your firmware and addressing any vulnerabilities, you're staying up to date with the latest capabilities, the encryption keys, and all of those types of things that are out there. So we not only want to lead there, but we continue to improve and build that and provide those to our customers who have purchased managed devices and enterprise devices out there.
Yeah, taking HP's lead. When Marco 6 years ago really concertedly, explicitly began their print security journey by hiring a team dedicated to it, it was always a thought process. It's always been included, but we've done a lot to our service delivery since then that is opt out rather than opt in. And one of those items is at setup, we changed default administrative passwords and service modes as applicable because that's not something that can just be set at the factory very easily and then installed. It's not like a single firewall where the serial number or the code on the sticker on the back makes sense. You're talking about deploying hundreds or thousands of devices at times. So that's something that is an enhancement we do at the delivery level. And similarly, on decommissioning, every device that we return through a Marco facility that receives a multi-pass overwrite of any memory on it, both at the hard drive level and the embedded memory, the eMMC or other solid state memory. That's usually a few gigabytes, right? So we do sanitize that at no additional cost, and we believe that's the way it should be across the board. Collectively, we, industry and manufacturers and service delivery partners, are all the good guys when it comes to cybersecurity. It is a team effort, and the best we can do is raise awareness of it and really just set that bar and make it the expectation so everybody else has to follow suit if that's the worst that we have to do. 4 brief questions. I got one that says, fleet assessments, are printers scanned in normal vulnerability scans that are being offered? Generally speaking, no, with a couple exceptions. Things like ports, protocols, and services, things that are easy to detect on a myriad of networkable devices, those will absolutely going to be scanned and audited, like SNMP, or is the FTP protocol enabled on a device. But that is distinctly different from looking at the firmware version and checking it for vulnerabilities like you expect it to on a Windows, a Macintosh, a Linux device. Those types of operating system level or firmware level, those are not included in your Tenable Nessus and others. It's just such a specific, minute, and hard to measure problem that they haven't gotten to that level of specificity yet. Number 2, do you have a recommendation on when to update or upgrade print devices? Is it end of support, end of life? Fun fact, end of support, end of life in our industry does have nuance, where end of life is typically when you're thinking about service life, capabilities, parts, and toner. End of support is, at least in my language and vernacular, it's going to be your firmware and security updates. So yes, security is going to say, I am, Steve is, Laura is, Mike is, about firmware being no longer available is a reason to upgrade, but the best time to plan for it is years in advance. So you're looking at a period of a minimum of 8 years on average. So if a device comes out, it's going to be supported for 8 years. And then after that, it really just depends. There are some HP models that have been supported for 15 years and others that are exactly on the 8 mark. There's no rhyme, reason, or otherwise. It's each manufacturer's decision, is my understanding. And secondly, you did ask about firmware, how often. Marco's official opinion, and I'm not just for sake of time going to ask Steve's because I know he could give a whole speech on this, is how frequently we say once per year minimum. And that's because you're not doing it at all today, most likely.
Yeah.
If you start with once a year, you're going to be in a much better spot than all of your peers. But that doesn't mean that you can't get a more mature program and start doing it as frequently as quarterly, or in some extreme cases, monthly, if you have tools that tell you when it's a security-based vulnerability. So a lot of options there. Please just reach out. We'd love to sit down with you and have that conversation. How does a hacker gain access to a network printer, or does HP have antivirus apps for printers? Short answer is that it's a long answer. Long answer summarized is that antivirus isn't exactly the right word when you're thinking about embedded security on these devices. But at a minimum, you definitely can be taking advantage of the features of your device by connecting them to your SIM tool. So getting those logged, audited, and analyzed on a centralized basis is a good place to start. Beyond that, lots of good things to research. And finally, entire conversation. Are the assessments included in maintenance agreements? Are they extra? So it's in the between. There is no charge for the Marco print security assessments, which is built upon the HPs and enhanced with a couple of additional things. Please just reach out to myself or your Marco representative, or even just the Marco at marconet.com. And we do those on an as requested basis. So with about 20,000 clients, it's not something that we currently do because there's not a fully automated API driven version of it that we have access to, but we are happy to do those for no additional cost and would love to walk you through those results. So we are now at the top of the hour. I know I talk quickly and I'm really not that caffeinated, but I'm so excited to have had a wonderful conversation with these very smart and talented people. Mike, Laura, Steve, thank you so much for your time.